Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about how you can use tests to help find and fix encoding errors. To start off with, I'll admit that I'm not the best at dealing with encoding issues. This tends to be an issue that bites me every now and then, and I struggle with it. Trying to remember what encoding is being used where, when I should be converting, it can make my head spin. Which is why I love using tests when I run into coding issues. Once I'm able to get a test that demonstrates the issue, I'll be confident that I've really fixed the issue once the test is passing, and not just when I think or hope it's fixed. Today, I'll walk through a crash I ran into recently with a custom podcast app I've been working on. I'll talk about how I generated a test case and how it helped me fix the issue and a few related issues. Let's see the exception where it all started. So this is the exception that was thrown when I was running the program one day. There was a character at position 103 that charmap wasn't able to encode. Now this crash stack, my last line here, it doesn't show the full statement because the statement went over more than one line. So I copied the lines involved here so you can see what the missing part is. So I was trying to write to a file, the file name, podcast name, title, and readable modified time. And one of these had an invalid character in it. I don't know which one because I don't know for this case where position 103 went. However, and I don't remember how, but I believed I knew which file caused this, so I made a copy of the file, put it into the test data folder, and I vowed to look at it and figure it out shortly. But then I didn't get to it for a few days, so I then set things up. I called a little test with copy files to phone on the file I had moved over, and something unexpected happened. The test passed. So I was very confused. This file should have been the file that generated the failure, but it didn't. Luckily, I had saved this crash stack here, so I knew I hadn't dreamt this error, but it also meant I no longer had the test data I thought, so I had to figure out what happened. So I created a new test file, and I sort of looked at this and I figured, hey, maybe the issue is, it's an accent character. So I put an E with an accent. It still worked though. So I tried a few other random Unicode characters, and then I found a Greek letter, this thing here, and this crashed it. Now, you might be asking me, why didn't you look up this character? I didn't think about that. I probably should have, but I think I got a little confused because I didn't know what encoding it thought it was, so I didn't think about doing that there. Something that I sort of figured out later, and I should have known at the time it would have made it easier, is if I looked up here, this is Python telling me which encoding failed. So what I needed to do to find this magic number, or magic letter that failed it, is I just need to look up the CP1252 encoding and find out what characters it doesn't know about. So, although I luckily managed to find this letter without too much trouble, if I'd sort of combined these two pieces of information together, probably would have been easier and faster for me to quickly and correctly get a character that didn't work. But the important part is I did have a test file now where I had added a tag with this Greek character, and when I tried to call copy files to phone with it, it crashed. So we've got something. Let's look at how we can make a test for this and figure out how to start solving this. So the previous text function I had for copy files to phone is this here, test underscore copy files to phone. And what it did is it took 5 MP3s, although they all actually were the same MP3, they just had different names, and just tried to copy them over to the phone, made sure that they were copied over as expected and the right functions were being called. So This is still a useful function. I didn't want to change it for my encoding, so I created a new test that I kind of copied from it, just called test copy files to phone odd encoding. So what I did here is I had an MP3 with this different encoding in the tag and an M4A with a different encoding in the tag. So I wanted to make sure the MP3 and M4A roots both worked. So I had these two functions, did basically the same thing as above. So I now have my test, and when I ran it, everything failed as expected. So we've got a test case that's failing. So let's look at the actual code and see if we can figure out how to fix the test case. Here's our function. I only copied part of it because I didn't need all of it. So let's look at it and see what's happening here. So it had actually taken me a little bit of time to figure it out. The problem was this open here. I had assumed that it was going to open the file with UTF-8 encoding, but it's actually going to open the file with the default encoding of Python at this point in time, which happens to be on my Windows machine, CP1252. So the simple fix here is just to actually set encoding to UTF-8. And if I do that, it's now going to open the file with UTF-8 encoding like I expect, and it will work. There was also another option that I could have set an environment variable, Python UTF-8 equals 1, which would have the same impact as making UTF-8 the encoding for it to run overall, but I'm not sure what other changes that might have, so I didn't really want to go with that approach. I preferred the way of just being more specific here and saying, yes, this file is a UTF-8 encoded file. So I made this change, and my test was then passing. So at this point, I could send this PR out to review. We found an error. We made a test for it, and we fixed it. Seems like a good PR. But I want to now see, since I have the solution, is this a pattern that I used elsewhere? Are there other spots I'm opening files and potentially writing to them where I haven't specified the encoding, and there might be problems like this there too? So I did search around, and I found one other file that had a similar problem. Let's take a look at that now. Here's the other code. I open a file and I write out a string that includes the full file path. Okay, so I'll follow my same pattern as before. I'll add a new test for this, and looking, because it's the file path, not the tags, I'll add a Unicode character that's not CP1252 compliant into that and make sure it fails. So I added the test, it was straightforward, ran it, and yeah, I got a crash, just as expected. And I was once again able to fix it by specifying in the opening here that this should be UTF-8 encoding. The test now passes. So at this point, I feel pretty good. I've fixed my crash, and then I found a similar pattern in another chunk of code, and I fixed that too. So I now prepare my code for upload, and I'm surprised because the first test I added fails now. But it was passing before. But I had slightly changed it because I've now added that Unicode character into the file name. And it turns out that that's tripping a related but slightly different issue. There's another point in that code where I'm actually writing the file name to the console. And when I run this script the way I usually do, the console's opening up with CP1252 encoding. So Python is failing because it's trying to print a character that doesn't match that. So there's another issue I need to fix here. Happy I found it. So with that, I realize what I need to do is I need to ensure that my Python code is running with UTF-8 as the encoding instead of the CP1252, which is a Windows-specific encoding. So I actually do this with that Python UTF-8 environment variable I mentioned earlier. So I put that in, and then the print statement works correctly because it's just a UTF-8 character and it knows how to print those. Now, at this point, I could probably go back, and I probably don't need to specify encoding UTF-8 for my two opens. I thought about it, and I decided to stick with this because sort of regardless of how my file is running, or my Python code is running, these two files I'm interacting with are supposed to be UTF-8 files. So I think that the extra sort of documentation here of specifying these are UTF-8 files is worth having them there. So even if they're not 100% necessary, I think it's a useful thing to put there. Thanks for going through all of that with me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing. If you have any comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas about things you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below or reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.